my father passed away after an accident, and during the funeral, before the coffin was even lowered, my stepmother stepped forward in front of the crowd and declared that I was not his biological son. The cemetery fell silent. Suspicious glances, hushed whispers. They tore at my heart. But then a week later, during the reading of the will, the lawyer pulled out a sealed envelope left by my father, clearly marked, "To be opened only if someone denies my son's lineage." And when the contents of the letter were read aloud, my stepmother's face turned ashen. She panicked, covered her face, and fled the room, leaving it steeped in silence. "Hello, my name is Dexter Carver. I'm 28 years old, living in Austin, Texas, and I work for Carver Fuel and Service, the chain of gas stations my father, Louis Carver, built from nothing. People often called my father a legend, a man who rose from nothing to create a small empire in the heart of sun-scorched Texas. But to me, he was a father, someone I both respected and felt distant from. My life, though materially abundant, always lacked an intangible piece, a true connection with family. And the story I'm about to tell, which began in what seemed like peaceful days, led me into a storm I never could have anticipated. I grew up in a sprawling house on the outskirts of Austin, where polished asphalt roads led to an ornate wrought iron gate. Our home lacked for nothing, from expensive cars in the garage to dinners prepared by a private chef. But if you asked me about my childhood, I'd say it was like a beautiful but cold room, where I stood alone amidst empty walls. My mother died when I was 5. My memories of her are fragmented. A gentle smile, a warm embrace, and the faint scent of her perfume when she kissed my forehead before bed. When she passed, part of my world vanished. My father, Louis Carver, never spoke of his pain, but I felt it in the way he threw himself into work. He built Carver Fuel and Service from a single roadside gas station into a chain of over 20 locations across Texas. I didn't blame him, but his absence left a void in me that no amount of money or comfort could fill. 3 years after my mother's death, my father remarried Sadie, a sharp-witted woman with brown hair and piercing blue eyes. Sadie wasn't the wicked stepmother of fairy tales, but she never tried to be my mother either. Her affection was reserved entirely for Liam, her son with my father, 9 years my junior. I still remember afternoons when Sadie sat with Liam reading to him, stroking his hair, or beaming as he babbled about his day. With me, she kept things cordial, polite greetings, faint smiles, and sometimes a look that reminded me I wasn't her priority. I didn't resent her for it. I understood Liam was her flesh and blood, while I was just a remnant of my father's past. But every time I saw her hug Liam, I felt a pang, a reminder that I no longer had anyone to call Mom. My father, Louis Carver, was a tall man with a deep, resonant voice and a natural air of authority. He was respected in Austin's community not just for his business success, but for his generous philanthropy. He built schools, funded scholarships, and organized free food distributions during the holidays. With Liam and me, he was fair, showing no favoritism. He taught me how to tie my shoes, fix a bike, and later how to read financial reports. He also made time to take Liam to baseball games or repair his toys. But his work kept him away from home. Family dinners were usually just me, Sadie, and Liam, with the clink of cutlery on porcelain plates and Sadie's vague remarks about what Liam needed or wanted. When my father was present, he was often tired, his gaze distant, as if he were somewhere far away. I can't recall the last time my father and I had a real conversation. Maybe it was when I was 15, when he took me to the first Carver Fuel and Service station, pointed at the weathered sign, and said, "Dexter, this is where it all began. If you want one day, it could all be yours." I nodded, not fully grasping his meaning, but the look in his eyes, full of expectation and pride, stayed with me. From then on, I vowed to make him proud. After graduating college with a degree in business administration, I joined Carver Fuel and Service without hesitation. I started with the smallest tasks, checking ledgers, supervising staff, even pumping gas on sweltering summer days. I didn't want anyone to think I was handed anything because I was Louis Carver's son. Gradually, I proved myself, I introduced new ideas from automating payment systems to expanding convenience services at the stations. In 4 years, I helped the company open 3 new locations, elevating the Carver Fuel and Service brand to new heights. My father began to see me differently. He called me into his office, clapped my shoulder, and said, "You've done well, Dexter. I'm proud of you." Those rare words were my greatest motivation. Colleagues started respecting me not just as the boss's son, but for my competence. Yet deep down, I still felt lonely. I had no close friends, no deep relationships. Work became my refuge where I could feel in control and valued. At home, things remained the same. Sadie kept her distance, and Liam, now a college sophomore, often seemed jealous of me. He never said it outright, but I saw it in his eyes whenever my father mentioned my achievements. That evening, everything changed. It was a crisp fall night, and I was at home preparing for another workday. My father rarely called for a family dinner, so when he did, it felt significant. As I entered the dining room, the chandelier's glow illuminated an elaborately set table. Sadie sat to one side, her hair neatly pinned up, her red lips forming a strained smile. Liam sat across from her, scrolling on his phone, barely looking up. My father sat at the head of the table, his demeanor serious but tinged with an unusual excitement. "Dexter, Sadie, Liam," he began, his voice deep and commanding, "I've been thinking a lot lately. Carver Fuel and Service isn't just my business. It's our family's legacy. And I believe it's time to pass it to someone who deserves it." My heart raced. I looked at my father, trying to guess his next words. Sadie set her wine glass down, her eyes flickering with wariness. Liam looked up, his brows furrowing. "Dexter," my father said, locking eyes with me, "you've proven yourself. You're not just my son. You're a man with vision and responsibility. I've decided to hand over full control of Carver Fuel and Service to you, starting next month." The dining room fell silent. My head buzzed with pride and disbelief. This was what I'd worked tirelessly for, but hearing it from my father felt like a dream. I looked at him, searching for words, and managed, "Thank you, Dad. I won't let you down." Sadie smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Congratulations, Dexter," she said, her voice sweet but cold. "It's a big responsibility, but I'm sure you'll do well." The word "mom" from her lips sounded forced, a reminder that I'd always be an outsider in her and Liam's world. Liam said nothing. He just stared at me, his eyes brimming with envy and resentment. He stood, muttered something about needing to get back to school, and left the table. Sadie watched him go, a flicker of concern in her eyes, but she quickly regained her composure. My father didn't notice the tension. He went on about the company's future, expansion plans, and taking Carver Fuel and Service beyond Texas. I listened, but a sense of unease began to creep in. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind raced with my father's announcement. I thought about the years gone by, how I'd strived to prove myself worthy of the Carver name. I thought about my mother, her faint memories, and my father, the man I both loved and felt distant from. I wondered if I was truly ready to carry his legacy. Outside, Austin lay cloaked in darkness, with only the lights of Carver Fuel and Service stations glowing like small flames in the night. I didn't know that just days later, everything I believed in would come crashing down, and I'd face a devastating truth, not only about my family, but about myself. I remember that evening vividly, sitting in my office at the company headquarters, mulling over future plans, when the phone rang, shattering my thoughts. I picked it up, expecting a routine work call, but the trembling voice on the other end made my heart stop. "Mr. Carver, this is Austin Central Hospital. Your father, Lewis Carver, has been in a serious accident on the highway. You need to come immediately." I froze for a few seconds. I don't recall how I responded, only that my heart pounded chaotically in my chest. The world around me blurred, as if shrouded in a thick fog. I grabbed my keys, rushed out of the office, and sped through Austin's dark streets like a madman. The sound of car horns, the glare of headlights, and my racing pulse merged into a chaotic symphony. One question looped endlessly in my mind. How is my father? Is he okay? When I reached the hospital, the stark white neon lights in the hallway stung my eyes. I ran to the reception desk, my voice breaking. "Louis Carver, where is he?" "I'm his son." The nurse pointed toward the emergency ward, her eyes full of pity. I sprinted down the corridor, my dress shoes clacking harshly against the tiled floor. When I arrived, Sadie and Liam were already there. Sadie stood with her arm around Liam's shoulders, her face pale but still carrying that familiar, icy composure. Liam's head was bowed, his eyes red, but he said nothing. I wanted to ask about my father's condition, but before I could, a doctor approached, his mask pulled down to his chin, his hands still in surgical gloves. "Is this the family of Louis Carver?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. I nodded, my throat dry. "I'm Dexter, his son. How's my father?" The doctor looked at us, his gaze heavy. "Mr. Carver sustained multiple injuries in a traffic collision. He's lost a lot of blood. We urgently need to transfuse blood, but his blood type is O negative, which is very rare. We'll need to test the family members for compatibility. Please follow me." Sadie, Liam, and I were taken to a small room where a nurse drew our blood. I sat in a chair watching the needle pierce my arm, but I felt no pain. My mind was consumed with thoughts of my father, of him sitting at the head of the dinner table just days ago, his voice full of pride as he spoke of my future. I couldn't imagine a world without him, the man who had shaped my life, even if he was often distant. Sadie sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly, her eyes flickering between Liam and me. Liam, usually so arrogant, now looked small and frightened, his shoulders trembling as the nurse removed the needle from his arm. No one spoke. The air in the room was heavy, as if we were all holding our breath, waiting for a miracle. A few minutes later, the doctor returned with the test results. His voice was calm but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "Mr. Carver has O negative blood. Dexter, you have A positive, which isn't compatible. Liam, you have O negative, which is a match. We'll proceed with the transfusion immediately." I exhaled, a spark of hope igniting within me. Liam nodded, his eyes still shadowed with sorrow but resolute. "Do it," he said, his voice hoarse. The nurse led him away while Sadie and I were asked to wait in the waiting area. I sank into a chair, my mind reeling. I wanted to believe everything would be okay, that Liam's blood would save my father, that he'd wake up and things would return to normal. But then I noticed Sadie. She didn't sit down like I did. She stood there, clutching the test results the doctor had handed her, staring at them as if they held a horrifying secret. Her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes narrowing. She turned to the doctor, her voice cold but resolute. "I want another test. A DNA test between Louis and Dexter." I went numb. My heart seemed to stop. "Sadie, what are you talking about?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger and confusion. "My father is lying in there, fighting for his life, and you want a DNA test? Now?" She met my gaze, her eyes sharp as knives. "Dexter, you know why I'm asking for this. Your blood type. It doesn't add up. If Louis is your father, why don't you have a compatible blood type? I just want things to be clear." Blood rushed to my head. "Clear? What do you need to be clear about right now?" "My father is in critical condition." I snapped, but Sadie didn't flinch. She turned back to the doctor, her voice still eerily calm. "Do it. I want to know the truth." The doctor hesitated, glancing between me and Sadie. "Ma'am, this isn't the right time. Our focus is on saving the patient." Sadie cut him off, her tone icy. "Do the test now. I need to know." After a moment's pause, the doctor nodded reluctantly and left. Sadie sat down, her eyes avoiding mine as if I'd become invisible. Time crawled by. I paced the waiting room, trying not to dwell on Sadie's words. A DNA test? Why was she doubting me? I was Louis Carver's son. I bore his name, grew up in his house, worked for his legacy. But a small corner of my mind wavered. My A-positive blood type. What did it mean? I didn't want to believe Sadie's suspicions, but a seed of doubt had been planted. Liam returned after the transfusion, looking exhausted but maintaining his tough facade. He sat beside Sadie, silent. I wanted to ask how he was feeling, to thank him for saving our father, but the air between us was too heavy. I just sat there, hands clenched, praying for my father to pull through. But the miracle never came. 3 hours later, the doctor emerged, his face etched with regret. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "Mr. Carver didn't make it. His injuries were too severe, and despite our best efforts, he's passed away." The world collapsed around me. My legs trembled, and I had to brace myself against the wall to keep from falling. Sadie burst into tears, but her sobs sounded more like a performance than genuine grief. Liam bowed his head, his shoulders shaking, but he said nothing. I wanted to scream, to punch the wall, to do anything to expel the agony tearing through my chest. But I just stood there, frozen, staring at the doctor as if he'd said something impossible. Still reeling from the loss, I saw Sadie stand, wipe her tears, and fix me with a cold stare. I didn't know what she was planning, but I sensed a bigger storm was coming. My father's death wasn't just a personal loss. It was the beginning of a battle I was utterly unprepared for. 3 days later, I stood before St. Mary's Church in Austin, where the autumn sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting vibrant patches of color across the stone floor. Today was my father's funeral. Louis Carver, the man who built Carver Fuel and Service, the father I both revered and felt distant from. Dressed in a black suit, I stood beside his casket, fighting to keep myself from breaking down. The heavy scent of white lilies mingled with the murmurs of mourners, relatives, friends, company employees, and local residents my father had helped. They came to bid farewell to an exemplary businessman, a devoted husband, a respected father. But to me, he was my entire world, a world now shattered. I gazed at the casket where my father lay, his face serene as if asleep. I longed to speak to him one last time, to thank him for believing in me, for entrusting me with his legacy. But all I could do was stand in silence, hands clenched, holding back tears. I didn't want anyone to see me as weak, especially today when all eyes were on me, the heir to Louis Carver's empire. Sadie and Liam sat in the front row just a few steps away. Sadie wore a black dress, a veil covering half her face, but I could still see the familiar coldness in her eyes. Liam, now 19, sat beside his mother, his eyes red but tearless. He bowed his head, hands tightly clasped as if suppressing something. I wanted to approach him, to say something to ease the tension between us, but I didn't know where to begin. Since that night at the hospital, when Sadie openly questioned my lineage, an invisible wall had risen between us. The ceremony began with the priest's sermon, his warm voice recounting my father's contributions to the Austin community. Louis Carver was not just a businessman, he said, but a man who brought light to those around him. He built not only a company, but a family, a legacy. My heart ached as I listened. Family? I wondered if we were truly a family. To me, family meant lonely evenings in my room, tending to my own wounds, Sadie's distant glances, and Liam's silence. But I didn't want to dwell on that now. I just wanted to give my father a proper farewell. After the sermon, a few people stood to share memories. A former Carver Fuel and Service employee recounted how my father gave him money to repair his home after a flood. A neighbor spoke of the free food distributions my father organized during the holidays. Each story was a piece of the man my father was, someone I loved but never fully understood. I stood there listening, feeling both proud and hollow. I wanted to speak, to share the memory of when my father took me to the first gas station, pointed at the sign, and said, "Dexter, this is where it all began." But I lacked the courage. Words stuck in my throat, and I feared that if I opened my mouth, I wouldn't hold back the tears. As the memorial drew to a close, the priest invited final words. I was about to step forward when Sadie rose. She lifted her veil, her pale face stark, but her eyes sharp as ice. "I'd like to say a few words," she announced, her voice ringing through the hushed church. Everyone turned to look at her, and a chill ran down my spine. Something in her tone unsettled me, a resolve, an unpredictable intent. Sadie stepped to the podium, her hands clasped tightly. She scanned the room, her gaze sweeping over relatives, friends, and employees. Then she looked directly at me. "Today we gather to bid farewell to Lewis Carver," she began, her voice low but cutting. "He was a husband, a father, a man we all respected. But there's a truth I believe everyone deserves to know." My heart pounded. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. "Dexter," she continued, her voice clear and cold, "is not Lewis Carver's biological son." The room fell into absolute silence. It felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. Every eye turned to me, shocked, skeptical, curious. I stood frozen, unable to believe what I'd just heard. Sadie, the woman who once called me son with forced affection, was now exposing a secret I didn't even know existed right at my father's funeral. She held up a sheet of paper, the DNA test results she had requested at the hospital. "I had it checked," she said, her voice unwavering. "Lewis had O-negative blood, but Dexter is a positive. The DNA test confirms that Dexter has no biological relation to Louis. I only want transparency, for the sake of this family and Louis's legacy." Whispers rippled through the room. Some relatives looked at me with suspicion, others shook their heads in disbelief. My face burned, not from shame but from rage. I wanted to scream, to snatch the paper from her hands, to demand why she chose this day to destroy everything. My father had just been laid to rest, his casket still before us, and yet she dared to turn his funeral into a stage for attacking me. "Sadie, enough!" My Aunt Martha stood, her voice trembling with anger. "This is Lewis's funeral. Have you no shame?" But Sadie didn't stop. She looked at me, her eyes like ice. "I only want the truth to be known," she said. "If Dexter isn't Lewis's biological son, he has no right to inherit Carver Fuel and Service. That's what Louis would have wanted, for his assets to go to his true family." True family. Those words stabbed my heart like a dagger. I looked at Liam, hoping he'd say something, stand up for me, but he just bowed his head, silent. I didn't know what he was thinking, whether he agreed with his mother or was simply too shocked to react. His silence made me feel more alone than ever. I stepped forward, drawing strength from somewhere deep within. "Sadie," I said, my voice hoarse but steady, "do whatever you want. But today is my father's day. If you have any respect for him, let him rest in peace." A few people nodded, murmuring agreement. Sadie's lips tightened, but she said nothing more. She returned to her seat, her eyes never leaving mine, as if challenging me. The ceremony ended in a heavy, frigid atmosphere. Mourners began to leave, but none dared meet my gaze. I overheard their whispers. "Is it true? How could it be? Poor Dexter." Each word like a needle piercing my pride. When everyone had gone, I stayed by the casket alone. I placed my hand on the cold wood, feeling its chill under my fingertips. "Dad," I whispered, "I don't know what the truth is, but I promise to protect what you left behind. I won't let her destroy it." I left the church, stepping into the crisp autumn air. The weak sunlight fell on my face but couldn't warm my cooling heart. I knew the days ahead would be difficult. Sadie had sown seeds of doubt in the Carver family, and I would have to face a battle, not only to protect my father's legacy but to defend my very identity. 5 days after the funeral, I stood before the modern glass building of Attorney Eugene Shaw's office in downtown Austin, ready to hear my father's will. The sky was overcast, heavy clouds looming as if pressing down on the city. I wore the same black suit from my father's funeral, but now it felt like armor, shielding me from the stares and whispers awaiting inside. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the unease clawing at my chest. Today my father's will would be read. Today I would learn whether Sadie's declaration at the funeral, that I was not Lewis Carver's biological son, would destroy everything I had lived and fought for. I pushed open the door, the cool air from the air-conditioned room sending a shiver through me. In the meeting room, everyone was already present. Sadie sat at the head of the table, her posture regal, her cold blue eyes sweeping over me. Liam sat beside her, his gaze avoiding mine, focused on his tightly clasped hands. A few close relatives, Aunt Martha, Uncle Henry, and Cousin Ellen, sat scattered around the table, their faces tense. Representatives from Carver Fuel and Service, including Carl, the CFO, and Laura, the regional manager, were also there, their eyes filled with curiosity. Eugene Shaw, my father's lawyer for over 20 years, stood at the head of the table, his silver hair and gold-rimmed glasses giving him the air of a final guardian of truth. "Dexter," Eugene nodded to me, his voice low but warm. "You're right on time. Please, take a seat. Let's begin." I pulled out a chair and sat across from Sadie. The room's atmosphere was heavy, as if we were all holding our breath, waiting for a ticking bomb to explode. The echoes of Sadie's announcement at the funeral lingered, the suspicious glances, the whispers behind my back, and Liam's silence, a reminder that I was fighting this battle alone. Eugene placed a folder on the table, his gaze sweeping over everyone. "Today we gather to announce the final will of Lewis Carver," he began, his voice clear and composed. "This will was last updated 6 months ago, notarized and legally filed. Everything in it reflects Lewis's final wishes." My heart pounded harder. Sadie sat upright, hands clasped, her eyes fixed on Eugene as if trying to read every word before it was spoken. Liam kept his head down, but I noticed his fingers trembling slightly. I wondered what he was thinking, whether he sided with his mother or, like me, was waiting for answers. Eugene opened the folder and began reading. "Lewis Carver bequeaths all assets, shares, operational control, and related properties of Carver Fuel and Service to Dexter Carver. The estimated total value of these assets is approximately $65 million. He paused, looking at me, his eyes conveying the weight of those words. The room fell silent. My head buzzed with relief and disbelief. My father had chosen me, Dexter Carver, the one Sadie claimed wasn't his biological son. I glanced at Sadie, waiting for her reaction. Her face paled, her lips pressed into a tight line, but she said nothing. Liam looked up, a flicker of shock in his eyes, but he remained silent. Eugene continued, "Mrs. Sadie Carver is to receive a vacation home in Houston and a fixed annual financial stipend. Liam Carver is to receive a scholarship fund valued at $1 million to support his education and future endeavors." Sadie shot to her feet, her chair scraping loudly. "That's impossible," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "This will must be reviewed. Dexter is not Lewis's biological son. I have proof. The DNA test results." She brandished the paper she'd waved at the funeral, her eyes blazing as if to burn me down. If Louis knew the truth, he would never have left everything to someone who isn't his son. The room erupted. Aunt Martha shook her head, whispering to Uncle Henry. Laura, the regional manager, looked at me with confusion. Liam clenched his fists, his gaze flickering between his mother and me as if torn. I wanted to stand, to shout at Sadie that she had no right to judge me, that my father chose me because he trusted me. But I sat there, gripping the chair, struggling to stay calm. "Mrs. Sadie," Eugene said, his voice still calm but sharp, "please sit down and maintain order." I haven't finished. Sadie blinked, as if stunned that he dared interrupt her. But she sat, her eyes still shooting daggers. Eugene produced a sealed envelope, handwritten with the words, "To be opened only in the event of a dispute regarding lineage." My heart raced. I didn't know what my father had prepared, but a chill ran down my spine. "Lewis anticipated this situation," Eugene said, opening the envelope and pulling out a letter and a medical document. He scanned the room, his gaze ensuring everyone grasped the gravity of the moment. Louis left a personal letter, accompanied by a medical document he personally signed. I will read the letter. He unfolded the letter, his voice lowering as if channeling my father's very soul. "I, Lewis Carver, write these words while of sound mind and body. I know that Dexter Carver is not my biological son. I am infertile, and I have known this truth for a long time. But I have always considered Dexter my true son, not because of blood, but because of the love and trust I have for him. He is the one I choose to carry on my legacy, for I see in him the integrity, dedication, and vision I always dreamed of. The room went deathly silent. I felt as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. My father knew. He knew I wasn't his biological son, yet he chose me. I looked at Sadie, and for the first time I saw her tremble, her face ghostly pale as if her soul had been drained. But Eugene wasn't done. Regarding Liam, he continued, I also know that he is not my biological son. Sadie had an affair in the early years of our marriage, and I chose to forgive her, to keep silent to protect the family's honor. But I love both of my sons, and I believe that love, not blood, is what makes a family. I hope that Dexter and Liam will together preserve Carver Fuel and Service, not for its wealth, but for the spirit I built it upon. Sadie broke down, but this time it wasn't the performative tears from the funeral. She covered her face, her shoulders shaking as if all her schemes had collapsed. Liam sat motionless, his eyes vacant, as if his world had been turned upside down. I looked at him, wanting to say something, but my throat tightened. I was as shocked as he was, not only by the truth about myself, but by the revelation about Liam, and by the love my father had for both of us, despite everything. Eugene folded the letter, his gaze softening as he looked at me. Lewis Carver was a wise man when he wrote this will, he said. This will is fully legal and binding. Dexter Carver is the official heir to Carver Fuel and Service. The room fell silent again, but this time it was different. Not a silence of doubt, but of acceptance. Aunt Martha walked over and hugged me, whispering, You're his son, Dexter. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Uncle Henry nodded, his eyes full of support. But Sadie and Liam remained seated like statues left behind in a storm. Sadie stood abruptly, wordlessly pulling Liam out of the room. He didn't look at me, but I saw his shoulders trembling, as if he were suppressing a tidal wave of emotions. I wanted to call him back, to tell him I didn't blame him, that we could face this together. But I just stood there, feeling both empty and burdened. The legacy my father left wasn't just wealth. It was a weight of truth, secrets, and a love I had never fully understood. As everyone left, Eugene patted my shoulder and said, Lewis trusted you, Dexter. But be prepared. The road ahead won't be easy. I nodded, feeling an invisible weight settle on my shoulders. As I stepped out of the office, I looked up at Austin's gray sky. A storm was coming, and I knew that, like the rain, my true challenges were only just beginning. In the days that followed, news of the will spread like wildfire. Local media began buzzing about the new heir of Carver Fuel and Service, laced with rumors about the lineage secret Sadie had revealed at the funeral. Company employees looked at me with a mix of curiosity and wariness, as if I were a puzzle they couldn't solve. I didn't blame them. I was questioning who I was myself after everything that had happened. But one thing was certain. My father had trusted me, and I couldn't let his legacy crumble. I threw myself into work, trying to bury my pain in long hours at the office. I reviewed financial reports, met with regional managers, and ensured Carver Fuel and Service ran smoothly. But no matter how hard I tried, the emptiness clung to me. One afternoon, as I was going over revenue reports in my office at Carver Fuel and Service's headquarters, a knock at the door startled me. I looked up to see Sadie standing there, a far cry from the cold, sharp woman I knew. She wore a simple dress, her hair loosely tied, and her blue eyes, once piercing, now carried a weary, almost pleading look. I stood caught off guard, unsure how to react. "Dexter," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Can we talk for a moment?" I nodded, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. "Please, sit." My tone was colder than I intended, but I couldn't hide my guardedness. After what she'd done, publicly questioning my lineage at the funeral, trying to overturn my father's will, I wasn't sure I could trust her. Sadie lowered her head, her hands clenching tighter. "I was wrong," she said, her voice trembling. I let my emotions take over. Louis was my husband, Dexter. I lived with him for over 20 years. And Liam, he's my son. I just wanted to make sure he has a future. Anger surged within me, but I held it back. Do you think I want to take Liam's future away? I asked. My father left him a scholarship fund. He left you a house and a fixed annual stipend. He thought of both of you. Sadie looked up, her eyes wavering. But Carver Fuel and Service, she said softly. It's Louis's life's work, our family's work. I just thought, if you shared some of the control, maybe we could keep things stable like a family. I stared at her, incredulous. Share control? After everything she'd done? I took a deep breath, keeping my voice steady. Sadie, my father's will was his final decision. He chose me, not because of blood, but because he believed I could carry on his legacy. I won't change that. She looked at me, a flicker of pain crossing her face, but then she nodded as if she'd expected my answer. I softened my tone. But I don't want to push you or Liam out of this family. You and Liam can stay at the Carver estate for as long as you like. I have no intention of taking away your comfort. I meant those words sincerely. Despite the hurt Sadie had caused, despite Liam never truly seeing me as a brother, I didn't want to sever all ties. My father had taught me that family, imperfect as it may be, was worth cherishing. But to Sadie, my offer seemed like a slap in the face. She shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. Do you think you're being noble, Dexter? She shouted, her voice trembling. You think you can toss us scraps like we're beggars? You're not Louis's real son, yet you've taken everything that should belong to my son. I was stunned, unprepared for her outburst. Sadie, I didn't take anything. Yes, I'm not Louis's biological son, but let's not forget that Liam isn't either, I said, struggling to stay calm. Louis made his decision. I'm honoring his wishes. She gave a bitter laugh. His wishes? You think Louis truly wanted to leave everything to someone who doesn't carry his blood? You're a hypocrite, Dexter. You act noble, but you just want to keep it all for yourself. Her words cut deep, slicing into my pride. I wanted to shout back, to tell her I'd worked tirelessly to earn my father's legacy, that I didn't need blood ties to prove I was his son. But I just stood there, looking at her, feeling both anger and pity. Sadie had let bitterness and ambition consume her, and now she was destroying herself. A few days later, I heard that Sadie and Liam had packed their bags and moved to the vacation home in Houston. They left no message, no call. I stood in the living room of the Carver estate looking at the family photos on the shelf. Rare pictures of the four of us, smiling awkwardly for the camera. I didn't try to hold them back. Perhaps this was the best ending for a relationship that was never truly a family. But there was still a void in my heart. I thought of Liam, the younger brother I'd once hoped to grow closer to. I didn't blame him for his silence, his resentment. He was just caught in the storm Sadie had created. But I wondered if one day we could sit down together as brothers and talk about what had happened. The rain continued to fall outside, droplets pattering against the windows, a reminder that life doesn't stop no matter how much I wished it would. I returned to my desk, opened my laptop, and began reviewing plans for Carver Fuel and Service. I knew the road ahead would be fraught with challenges, not just for the company, but because of the doubts still lingering in the air. But I had promised my father and myself that I wouldn't let his legacy fall apart. In the first weeks after officially becoming CEO of Carver Fuel and Service, I felt like I was walking a tightrope over a chasm of doubt and pressure. The company was facing challenges far greater than I'd imagined. After my father's death, revenue at the gas stations plummeted. Some suppliers paused contracts, citing uncertainty about the company's future. Employees were unsettled, whispering among themselves about rumors and whether I had the ability to lead the empire my father had built from scratch. In board meetings, I sensed the scrutinizing gazes of those who had once been my father's colleagues. He's just a lucky kid, I overheard one board member whisper to another, "He's not even Lewis's real son. How can we trust him?" Those words cut like knives, but I kept a composed facade, gritted my teeth, and pressed on. Each day I arrived at the office at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight touched the Carver fuel and service stations. I reviewed ledgers, met with regional managers, and tried to boost employee morale. But every night returning to the empty Carver estate, I felt like a lone warrior on a battlefield. The mansion now held only me and my memories. I often stood before the family photos in the living room, staring at my father's smile, wondering if he was watching me, if he saw how hard I was trying not to let him down. One morning, as I was reviewing financial reports, Carl, the CFO, entered my office. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, he always maintained a stern but fair demeanor. "Dexter," he said, his voice low, "we need to hire an independent financial consultant. Things aren't stable right now. We need to restructure our management system to regain trust." I nodded, knowing he was right. Carver Fuel and Service wasn't just a chain of gas stations. It was a complex business with hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in annual turnover. I couldn't do everything alone, no matter how hard I tried. "Do you have any promising candidates?" I asked. "There's one," Carl replied. Elena Moore, 30 years old, formerly with a major energy corporation in Dallas. She has experience in financial restructuring and internal audits. "I think she could help us." I agreed immediately, not realizing this decision would change everything. 2 days later, Elena Moore walked into my office. And from the first glance, I knew she wasn't someone who just showed up to do the bare minimum. Elena was tall, her black hair neatly tied back with sharp yet warm brown eyes. She wore an elegant gray suit, and when she shook my hand, her grip was firm and confident. "Mr. Carver," she said, her voice clear, "I've studied Carver Fuel and Services situation. We have a lot of work to do, but I believe we can get things back on track." I smiled, feeling a spark of hope. "Call me Dexter," I said, "and I look forward to working together." Elena didn't waste time. She dove into the work like a whirlwind, analyzing data, meeting with managers, and proposing bold yet practical changes. She uncovered accounting discrepancies, inefficient contracts, and underperforming branches that my father had likely overlooked in his busyness. I was impressed by her intelligence and candor. Unlike others, Elena didn't look at me with suspicion. She treated me as a partner, not the lucky heir the media labeled me. One afternoon, as we worked late, Elena looked at me over a pile of documents. "Dexter," she said, her tone gentle but serious, "I know you're under a lot of pressure. The media, the rumors, I don't care about them. But I see how you work. You have vision, and I believe you can take this company further than even Lewis Carver did." I was taken aback, unprepared for her words. For weeks, I'd grown accustomed to doubt and scrutiny. Elena's words were like a cool breeze, easing some of my loneliness. "Thank you," I said, my voice hoarse. "I'm just trying not to let my father down." She smiled, a rare warmth in her expression. "You won't let him down. But you need to believe in yourself, Dexter. Not because of the will, but because you're truly capable." From then on, Elena became my most vital ally. We worked together not only to fix the company's flaws, but to build a new vision. I proposed expanding services at the stations, adding electric vehicle charging stations, 24/7 convenience stores, and even automated car washes. Elena helped turn those ideas into reality with detailed financial plans and clear strategies. Gradually, employees began to trust me more. They saw I wasn't just a name on paper, but someone who genuinely cared about the company's future. The months that followed were an unrelenting battle, but this time I wasn't just fighting for my father's legacy. I was fighting for myself. Under my leadership and with Elena's support, Carver Fuel and Service began to regain its momentum. We worked day and night, from tense boardroom meetings to field visits at gas stations on the outskirts of Austin. I wanted to ensure every branch ran smoothly. that employees felt heard, and that customers still trusted the brand my father had built. Our efforts gradually paid off. Suppliers, initially hesitant, began signing new contracts. Revenue stabilized, and the upgraded stations with electric vehicle chargers and 24/7 convenience stores started to thrive. One early morning, standing at a newly renovated station, I watched cars stream in and out, heard the chatter and laughter of employees, and felt a quiet pride stir within me. "Dad," I whispered to myself, "I hope you can see this." After 6 months, Carver Fuel and Service was truly revitalized. Revenue exceeded expectations, the stations operated more efficiently than ever, and employee morale was restored. During a board meeting, I presented the latest financial results, and for the first time I saw Richard, a major shareholder, nod approvingly. His eyes held respect rather than doubt. "You've done well, Dexter," he said, his voice low but sincere. "Louis would be proud of you." Those simple words were everything I needed to hear. I glanced at Elena, seated at the corner of the table, and she smiled, her eyes seeming to say, "I told you so." After the meeting, she pulled me aside. "See," she said, her tone lightly teasing. "I told you you'd pull it off." I laughed, feeling lighter than ever. "I couldn't have done it without you, Elena." She shook her head, but her smile widened. "We're a team, Dexter. Don't forget that." My relationship with Elena grew deeper. We started meeting outside of work, not just to discuss business, but to share the small details of our lives. One evening, she invited me to a small park on the outskirts of Austin, where she often jogged. We sat on a wooden bench watching the moonlight glimmer on the lake. "Dexter," she said softly, "have you ever thought about living for yourself? Not for the company, not for the legacy, but just for you?" Her question caught me off guard. Since my father's death, I'd lived for Carver Fuel and Service, for my promise to him, for proving I was worthy. Living for myself? I hadn't considered it. "I don't know," I admitted. "Maybe I've gotten used to putting responsibility above everything." She took my hand, her touch gentle but enough to make my heart race. "You deserve to be happy, Dexter," she said, "and I want to be there helping you find that happiness." I looked into her eyes, and for the first time I felt I wasn't just Louis Carver's heir or a CEO battling pressure. I was Dexter, a man learning to open his heart, to love and to live. I squeezed her hand lightly and smiled. "Thank you, Elena. I want that too." That night, driving home, I felt a lightness I'd never experienced before. Carver Fuel and Service was thriving, and I was finding my place in the world, not just through work, but through a woman who was becoming a light in my life. Yet I knew life was never simple. A part of me still wondered about Liam, about Sadie, about what had happened between us. I didn't know if we'd ever reconcile, but I held on to hope that, as my father once said, love would find a way. Since Sadie and Liam moved to Houston, I hadn't heard a word from them. I thought about calling or texting, but each time I picked up the phone, I hesitated. I didn't know what to say after everything that had happened, after Sadie's declaration at the funeral, after the truth revealed in my father's will, after Liam's silence when I needed him most. I wondered if he resented me or was simply caught in his mother's schemes. One morning, as I was checking emails in my office, a strange message stopped me cold. It came from an unfamiliar email address, but the subject line made my heart race. "Dexter, we need to talk." I opened it, my mind swirling with unease. The words on the screen were simple but sincere. "Hello, Dexter, it's Liam. You probably don't want to hear from me after everything that's happened. I know I stayed silent when Mom did things that weren't right. I was wrong and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me right away, but I want to come back to Austin to work for Carver Fuel and Service. Not to compete, but to carry on what Dad left behind. Can you give me a chance?" I sat there, staring at the screen, my emotions surging like waves. Part of me wanted to reply immediately, to tell Liam I didn't blame him, that I wanted to mend things. But another part, the part hurt by his silence at the funeral, by his departure without a word, made me pause. Was this another of Sadie's plans, or did Liam genuinely want to change? I called Elena into my office and showed her the email. She listened as I shared my conflicting feelings. The longing to reconnect with Liam, but also the fear of being betrayed again. Elena tilted her head, thoughtful. Dexter, I don't know Liam, but I know you. You're someone who always chooses what's right even when it's hard. If Liam truly wants to come back to start over, don't you think you should give him a chance? Not for his mother, but for you and Liam, who used to be brothers. Her words struck a deep chord within me. I remembered our childhood when Liam and I played in the backyard of the Carver estate, when he was just an innocent kid untouched by adult schemes. I remembered my father's gaze as he watched us, as if hoping one day we'd preserve his legacy together. You're right, I said softly. I'll give Liam a chance. But he'll have to prove himself. A week later, I met Liam at a small cafe in downtown Austin. When he walked in, I barely recognized him. Liam, now 21, looked more mature, taller, but his eyes still held traces of the boy I once knew. He wore a white shirt and jeans, his demeanor simple but composed, no trace of the arrogance or resentment from before. He sat across from me, hands clasped, his gaze wavering. Dexter, he began, his voice low but earnest. Thank you for meeting me. I don't know where to start, but I'm sorry for everything. For staying silent at the funeral, for not standing by you when Mom did those things. I studied him, searching for any hint of deceit, but all I saw was remorse. He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. I've thought a lot, Dexter. When Mom and I moved to Houston, I thought it was a way to forget everything. The funeral, the will, what she said. But I couldn't. I miss Dad. I miss Carver Fuel and Service. I miss what we used to have. I don't want to compete with you. I just want to work, to be part of the legacy Dad left behind. I stayed silent, letting his words settle. I wanted to believe him, but the memory of those painful days lingered. Liam, I said, my voice hoarse, I don't know if I can fully trust you yet, but I'm willing to give you a chance, not for your mom, not for Dad, but because I want us to be brothers, real brothers. He nodded, a spark of hope in his eyes. Thank you, Dexter. I won't let you down. I decided to bring Liam on at the main Carver Fuel and Service station, the one where my father began his career. I didn't give him a high position or special treatment because he was my brother. Everyone here is judged by their work, not their last name, I said during an internal meeting announcing Liam's role as a trainee. Some employees were surprised, others whispered, but I didn't care. I wanted Liam to prove himself just as I had. In the first weeks, I watched him from a distance. He worked hard, unafraid of tough tasks, from cleaning the station to helping customers on busy days. I saw him under the scorching Texas sun, wiping sweat from his brow but still smiling as he chatted with colleagues. Once I overheard a veteran employee tell him, "You're like Lewis back in the day, Liam." He started like this too. Those words made me smile, if only inwardly. I began mentoring Liam the way my father had mentored me. I taught him how to read revenue reports, handle customer issues, and keep the team motivated. I was patient but firm, not wanting him to think things would be easy just because we were brothers. Liam learned quickly, and I saw a determination in him I hadn't noticed before. Some evenings, when it was just the two of us in the office, he'd ask about the company's early days, about stories of our father I knew. I told him about the time Dad took me to the first station, pointed at the sign, and said, "Dexter, this is where it all began." One evening, after a long day's work, Liam looked at me, his voice soft. "Dexter, are you mad at me?" For what happened? I met his gaze, seeing the sincerity of a brother. I was mad, I admitted, but not anymore. We were both victims of things we couldn't control, Liam. What matters is what we choose to do from here. He nodded, his eyes glistening. I want to make Dad proud, Dexter. And I want you to be proud of me. I placed a hand on his shoulder and smiled. Keep going like this, Liam. I'm already starting to be proud of you. From then on, our relationship began to rebuild. We were no longer adversaries, divided by adult schemes. We were brothers, not by blood, but by our commitment to each other and to our father's legacy. Employees started calling us the Carver brothers, and every time I heard that name, a small spark of joy flickered in my heart. A year had passed since Liam's return, and Carver Fuel and Service not only survived but thrived beyond anything we could have imagined. We opened 5 new branches, upgraded stations with automated car washes, electric vehicle charging stations, and 24/7 convenience stores bustling with customers. Revenue soared past expectations, and the local press, once fixated on the non-blood heir, now ran glowing articles about the revival of the Carver empire under the hands of the Carver brothers. I read those stories with a faint smile, not for the recognition, but because I knew my father somewhere would be smiling with pride. Liam and I became a seamless team. I, with my calm and strategic approach, focused on steering the company's future. Liam, dynamic and creative, brought fresh ideas, from designing a pre-booking service app to launching promotional campaigns that drew in customers. He worked tirelessly, no longer the arrogant college student of the past, but a young man determined to prove his worth. We often stayed late after work, reviewing reports, discussing plans, or simply laughing about childhood memories. Days when life was simpler, before secrets and schemes drove us apart. Meanwhile, in Houston, Sadie led a much quieter life compared to the haughty matriarch she once was. I heard she rarely went out, spending most of her time in the vacation home my father left her. Once I stumbled across a social media post from a mutual acquaintance mentioning that Sadie had joined a painting class to find herself again. I didn't know if she truly regretted her actions, but I hoped she'd find some peace, even just a little. One evening, as Liam and I prepared for a charity event called Fueling Hope, a fund we established to support underprivileged children in Texas, a staff member handed me a local newspaper. The front page featured a photo of Liam and me standing in front of a gas station, smiling, with the headline, "The Carver Brothers, Carrying on Lewis's Legacy." I looked at the photo, seeing Liam beside me, his eyes brimming with confidence, and I knew we had achieved what our father always wanted, not just preserving the company, but building a true family. My relationship with Elena had also deepened. One evening after the Fueling Hope event, she invited me to her apartment in downtown Austin. It was my first time in her personal space, a small but cozy place, adorned with abstract paintings on the walls and the faint scent of vanilla from scented candles. We sat on her sofa, sipping wine, and talked about the future. A few months later, at the 30th anniversary celebration of Carver Fuel and Service, I stood on stage, looking out at our employees, partners, and those who had stood by us. Liam stood beside me, confident and radiant, the brother I'd always dreamed of having. Elena sat in the front row, her eyes sparkling with pride. I gripped the microphone, took a deep breath, and began my speech. "Today, we're not just celebrating 30 years of Carver Fuel and Service," I said, my voice resonating through the hall. "We're celebrating a legacy, the legacy of Lewis Carver, who taught me that family isn't defined by blood, but by those who choose to stay and face the darkest days with you." I paused, scanning the attentive faces in the crowd. "I used to think blood made a family," I continued, "but I've learned that family is built on love, commitment, and trust. My father didn't leave me wealth. He left me the belief that a true legacy must be nurtured with honesty and love." I glanced at Liam, and he nodded, his eyes full of emotion. "Liam and I were not just the Carver brothers," I said. "We're proof that no matter what storms come, love and forgiveness can heal anything." The applause erupted, and a wave of emotion surged through me. I looked down at Elena, saw her smile, and knew I had found not just a family, but a home within myself. After the ceremony, I stood in front of the first Carver Fuel and Service station, where my father once pointed to the sign and spoke of his dreams. I felt a profound connection to him. I was no longer the lonely boy of my childhood, nor the doubted heir. I was Dexter Carver, a man who had learned that family isn't just defined by blood but by those who choose to stay and build together. My father's true legacy wasn't wealth. It was how he was remembered, a man who loved, forgave, and trusted. And I, alongside Liam and Elena, would continue to carry that spirit forward. Not just through Carver fuel and service, but in how we live, love, and forgive.